It was exactly 8 p.m. when everything began. January had wrapped the city in a bitter cold, the kind that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. Outside, the streets were almost empty. Most people had already retreated into their homes, curtains drawn, heaters humming softly in the background. The world felt paused, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I was sitting alone on my couch, legs tucked under a blanket, half watching a reality show that had been playing in the background for over an hour. I wasn't really paying attention. My eyes were on the screen, but my mind was somewhere else, drifting without purpose. My name is Mina Carter. I was 26 years old then. Nothing about that evening felt unusual. It was just another quiet winter night. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt, how rare it was to have a moment where nothing demanded my attention. Then, my phone rang. The sudden sound made me flinch. I'd glanced at the screen and felt a small wave of irritation wash over me. Emily Harper, my best friend. I stared at her name for a second, debating whether to answer or let it ring. Emily had a habit of calling at odd hours over the smallest things. Still, something about the timing made me uneasy. I answered. "Hey, Emily," I said casually, trying to hide my mild annoyance. There was no response at first, just shallow breathing on the other end of the line. "Emily?" I repeated. "Emmy?" Her voice finally came through, barely above a whisper. "Please come to my house, right now." The tremor in her voice snapped me to attention. "What happened?" I asked, sitting up straight. "Are you okay?" "My parents left for a wedding out of town. I'm alone, and I swear someone is inside the house." I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Emily, come on. You're probably just imagining things." "I'm not," she said quickly. "I feel it. I hear it." "Hear what?" There was a pause. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "Footsteps, slow ones, like someone walking around, wearing something metallic. It sounds like anklets." I almost laughed. Almost. "Emily," I said, trying to sound reassuring, "you don't believe in ghosts. Neither do I. You're just scaring yourself." For a moment, the line was silent. Then I heard it. A sudden, sharp scream. Not a startled scream, not a playful one, a scream filled with pure terror. "Emily!" I shouted. The call ended. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, as the screen went dark. I immediately called her back. The phone was switched off. A cold knot formed in my chest. I tried again. Same result. That's when true fear set in. Emily wasn't the type to play jokes like this, and the scream, it hadn't sounded fake. It had sounded real. Too real. I threw the blanket off, grabbed my jacket, and rushed toward the door. As I slipped on my shoes, my mother's voice came from the kitchen. "Mina, where are you going at this hour?" I hesitated for half a second. "Emily called. She's scared. I need to check on her." My mother frowned. "In this weather? Be careful." "I will," I replied, already reaching for my car keys. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside. My breath turned white in the air as I hurried to my car. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the neighborhood, and within seconds I was on the road. The drive to Emily's house usually took 15 minutes. That night, it felt like an eternity. Every red light felt like an obstacle. Every empty intersection made my imagination run wild. My mind kept replaying her scream over and over again, each time sounding more desperate than before. By the time I reached her street, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Emily lived in a large two-story house at the end of a quiet suburban road, the kind of place that looked warm and inviting during the day. That night, it looked abandoned. No lights, no movement. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. It was unlocked. That alone sent a chill down my spine. "Emily?" I called as I stepped inside. No answer. The door closed behind me with a soft click that echoed far too loudly in the empty house. Inside, it was eerily quiet. No TV, no music, not even the hum of appliances. The silence felt unnatural, pressing against my ears. I walked slowly down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the wooden floor. Each step made me more aware of how alone I was. "Emily!" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Her bedroom door was open at the end of the hall. A faint glow from the streetlight outside spilled into the room. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness. I froze. For a second, I thought the power had gone out. Then I realized the rest of the house was still faintly visible from the streetlights outside. It was just this room. My heart began to race. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. Creak, creak. In the corner of the room stood a rocking chair. It was moving, slowly. Someone was sitting in it. The rocking chair moved back and forth in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the wood groaning softly with each motion. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room, as if the walls themselves were listening. I couldn't see the person sitting there clearly. The light from outside barely reached that corner, leaving the figure cloaked in shadow. All I could make out was a vague outline, still, unmoving, except for the chair beneath it. My mouth went dry. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice barely making it past my lips. No response. The chair creaked again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct told me to turn around and run, but my feet refused to move. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkness. I took one slow step forward. The chair stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. The air felt colder near that corner, as if something was draining the warmth from the room. I took another step. That's when it happened. Something wrapped around my ankle. I gasped sharply, instinctively trying to pull away, but the grip tightened for a brief second. The skin-to-skin contact sent a shock through my entire body. The hand was ice cold. Not just cold from the winter air, this was a deep, unnatural cold, like touching something that had never been alive to begin with. I felt moisture against my skin, thick, sticky. My heart lurched. I yanked my leg back with all the strength I had and stumbled, nearly falling onto the bed. I looked down, my chest heaving, expecting to see someone crouched at my feet. There was nothing there. No hand, no body. The floor was empty. My eyes darted back to the corner. The rocking chair was still there, but it was empty. No figure, no movement. The chair stood perfectly still, as if it had never moved at all. For a moment, my mind tried to convince me that I had imagined everything, that fear had played tricks on me, that exhaustion and panic had created something that wasn't real. Then I noticed the smell, a faint metallic odor, like rust or blood. I didn't wait to question it. I turned and ran. I burst out of the bedroom and into the hallway, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. My footsteps echoed loudly as I rushed toward the living room, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might tear itself out of my chest. "Emily!" I shouted. "Please answer me." My voice bounced off the walls and came back to me, distorted and hollow. The living room was just as dark as the rest of the house. I stood in the middle of it, spinning slowly, trying to make sense of my surroundings. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound was sudden and sharp, slicing through the silence like a blade. I jumped, my heart nearly stopping. For a second, I didn't move. The doorbell rang again. I swallowed hard and forced myself to walk toward the front door. My hands were shaking as I reached for the handle. I opened it slowly. The porch was empty. Cold air rushed inside, brushing against my face and sending another shiver down my spine. I stepped forward slightly, peering into the darkness outside, but there was no one there, no footsteps, no movement. I was about to close the door when I heard it, a dull, heavy sound from behind me, like something falling. I turned around. She was standing there, in the center of the living room, a woman. She wore a long white dress that hung loosely from her thin frame. Her hair was dark and tangled, covering most of her face. Her bare feet were planted firmly on the floor. Her hands hung at her sides. Blood dripped steadily from her fingers, forming small dark pools on the carpet. My body went rigid. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. The woman slowly lifted her head. Though I couldn't see her eyes clearly, I knew without a doubt that she was looking straight at me. Then she tilted her head at an unnatural angle, and she ran. She moved faster than any human should, her feet barely touching the floor as she rushed toward me. The distance between us vanished in seconds. I finally found my voice and screamed. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for impact, for pain, for something, anything to happen. "Mina!" A voice cut through the chaos. I opened my eyes. The living room lights were on. The woman was gone. Standing a few feet away from me was a man, his face pale, his expression filled with confusion and concern. "Mina, what happened?" he asked. It took me a moment to recognize him. "David?" I whispered. David Harper, Emily's cousin. He had a jacket on, his car keys still in his hand, as if he had just walked in. "There's no one here," he said, glancing around the room. "Why are you screaming?" I could barely stand. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any second. "I saw her," I said, my voice trembling. "She was real. She was bleeding. I saw her." David ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but there's no one here. This house is empty." I shook my head slowly. "Then where is Emily?" That question seemed to unsettle him. David pulled out his phone. "I've been trying to call her too." He dialed her number and put the phone on speaker. We stood there, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, a ringtone. Faint, distant. It echoed through the house. My blood ran cold. "That's coming from inside," I whispered. David's eyes widened slightly. He turned his head, listening carefully. He said, "It's coming from downstairs." The basement. We exchanged a look, one that said neither of us wanted to go down there, but both of us knew we had no choice. David grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and I turned on the flashlight on my phone. The beams of light cut through the darkness as we moved toward the basement door. David hesitated before opening it. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The door creaked loudly as he pulled it open. A wave of cold, stale air rushed up from below. The smell hit me immediately.
damp, moldy, old, like a place that hadn't been used or seen daylight in years. The basement stairs descended into darkness, disappearing into a black void that our flashlights could barely penetrate. Somewhere below us, Emily's phone stopped ringing. The silence that followed felt suffocating. David took the first step down. I followed, my heart hammering with every step, knowing deep down that whatever waited us in that basement was not something we were prepared to face.
The basement steps groaned under our weight as we moved downward, each creak sounding louder than the last in the suffocating silence. My flashlight trembled in my hand, its narrow beam bouncing off concrete walls stained with dark patches of moisture. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a smell that made my stomach turn, something between rot and iron. David reached the bottom first. He swept his flashlight slowly from left to right, revealing a wide, cluttered space. Old furniture lay scattered as if it had been thrown aside in anger. Broken boxes, torn cardboard, and rusted metal shelves stood crooked against the walls. It felt like a place time had forgotten. "Emily?" David called out, his voice echoing weakly. No answer. I swallowed hard and stepped off the last stair. The moment my foot touched the basement floor, I felt it again, that strange heaviness, like invisible pressure pressing down on my chest. Then we heard it, a soft sound, not footsteps this time. Laughter. It was low and distorted, as if someone were laughing underwater. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I grabbed David's arm. "Did you hear that?" Before he could respond, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. David raised his flashlight higher, aiming it toward the far wall. For a second, all I saw was stained concrete. Then something moved. A shape slowly emerged from the darkness, descending along the wall as if gravity didn't apply to it. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, the woman in white. Her body twisted unnaturally as she moved, her limbs bending at impossible angles. Her dress was torn and soaked, clinging to her thin frame. Blood dripped steadily from her hands, splattering onto the floor beneath her. Her face was still hidden behind her hair. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. "That's her," I whispered. "That's the woman I saw upstairs." David stiffened beside me. I could see his jaw tighten, his knuckles turning white as he clenched his fist around the flashlight. "Who are you?" David shouted, his voice shaking despite his effort to sound firm. "This is my cousin's house. You don't belong here." The woman didn't respond. Instead, she slowly lifted her head. Though her face was still obscured, I felt her attention lock onto us. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, my breath turning visible in the beam of my flashlight. Then, without warning, a wooden chair scraped loudly across the floor. It lifted into the air. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. The chair flew toward us. David shoved me aside just in time. The chair smashed against the wall behind us, splintering into pieces. Before either of us could react, something sharp whirred through the air. A knife. It struck David's hand with a sickening sound, driving straight through his palm. He screamed in pain, dropping the flashlight as blood poured down his arm. "Run!" he shouted, clutching his hand. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed David by the arm and pulled him toward the stairs. Behind us, objects began crashing to the floor. Boxes, tools, anything within reach slammed violently against the walls, as if thrown by invisible hands. We raced up the stairs, nearly tripping over each other in our panic. My lungs burned as I dragged David upward, his blood smearing across my sleeve. The basement door slammed shut behind us on its own. We collapsed onto the hallway floor, gasping for air.
David groaned, his face twisted in agony. The knife was still lodged in his hand, blood dripping steadily onto the floor. "Oh my God! Oh my God! What do we do?" Before either of us could answer, headlights swept across the front windows. A car had pulled up outside. Moments later, the front door burst open and two people rushed in. Emily's parents. Her father, Richard Harper, and her mother, Laura. Their eyes widened in horror when they saw David's injured hand and my blood-stained clothes. "What happened?" Laura cried. "Where's Emily?" David gritted his teeth through the pain. "There's something in this house, something not human." Richard shook his head. "That's impossible." But his voice lacked conviction. I told them everything about the phone call, the scream, the woman in white, the basement. As I spoke, I noticed something strange. Emily's parents were exchanging glances, the kind people exchange when they're hiding something. "Tell us the truth," I said quietly. "There's something about this house, isn't there?" Richard hesitated. Then he sighed heavily. "We bought this house cheap, too cheap." Laura lowered her head. "Years ago, a young woman lived here with her family. One night, she murdered all of them, slit their throats. People said she was possessed." My skin crawled. "What happened to her?" David asked. "No one knows. Some say she disappeared. Others say she died in the fire that followed." The words barely left his mouth when a loud crack echoed above us. The lights flickered violently. Then the house caught fire. Flames erupted along the walls, racing across the ceiling as thick smoke filled the air. Laura screamed. Richard shouted Emily's name and ran deeper into the house. "We have to get out!" I yelled. David stumbled, barely able to stand, but adrenaline pushed him forward. We raced toward the living room, the heat growing unbearable with every step. Somehow we made it outside. The cold night air hit us like a slap. Behind us, the house burned like a torch. Richard and Laura didn't come out. I screamed their names until my throat felt raw, but the flames swallowed everything. Time blurred after that. Emily survived. Her parents didn't. A month passed. Emily moved into a small apartment across town, leaving that house behind forever. She barely spoke, barely slept. The light had vanished from her eyes. On the night of her birthday, I stayed with her. She didn't want to celebrate, but my parents insisted on doing something small to remind her she wasn't alone. After everyone left, it was just the two of us in her apartment, cleaning up in the kitchen. Emily washed the dishes, I dried them. She looked calm, almost peaceful. "You know," she said softly, "I thought my life was over after everything that happened, but tonight I felt normal again." I smiled. "You're not alone, Emily. Never." She nodded. Then she screamed. I dropped the plate I was holding as she raised her hands. They were covered in blood. The lights went out. The apartment door creaked open. A shadow stepped inside. It held two knives. A familiar voice whispered, "I'm back." The knives plunged forward. Then, suddenly, the lights snapped on. No blood, no wounds. We were standing there, unharmed. My heart was racing when I heard slow clapping behind us. David stood in the doorway. "It's over, Emily," he said calmly. She stared at him. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed everything. Her father had killed her mother, made it look like an accident. She planned everything, the ghost, the fire, the fear, to make it look supernatural. David pulled out his phone. "I already called the police." Emily smiled weakly. "I knew you would." Sirens echoed in the distance. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't ghosts. They're the ones who know exactly how to make you believe in them.